because a lot of the questions are the same. But Mike, when I spoke with you and I'm like, I really would love to talk commercial too. And you're like, that's a different thing. I have no idea, talk to somebody else. Why is it a different thing? Like why is it, are you experiencing different situations?
Well, first of all, I have to say how thrilled I am to join you today.
Thank
And,
you.
I'm not only a friend and admirer of yours for many years, but I absolutely love this series of work that you're doing and bringing different people together and speaking about contemporary topics and culture and everything relevant to today. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank
I
you.
also have to say I'm humbled, and I'm going to have a very tough act to follow. I can't get over just how insightful Marlene was with regard to the, not that I'm surprised she's someone I also have admired for so long, but just I took so much away from that incredible topic and presentation. And so I'm just thrilled to be here and also really learned quite a bit just from the past few minutes.
Okay.
So tell me.
Now let's learn from you.
Let's hope so. So please repeat your question.
Okay, you said it's a different thing, right? So
yes.
What do you think? I mean, you're not an expert.
Okay, I can tell you in a very basic way.
Yeah.
To me, the way they're different, and I'm sure it's a very subjective answer, is commercial or retail is very much a need-based business. Where a firm or a business, would need an X number of square footage in a particular location. And I personally think of real estate as a very emotional, residential real estate is a very emotional need-based. Obviously, someone will have a particular desire for space, but it tends to be, even though we think of it as how much space do you need, it tends to be very want or desire driven versus, looking at square footage or an actual dollar amount of cap rate, in terms of recouping particular investment assets. So I think of it as desire versus a functional need.
And back to the hearts and minds, what have you been experiencing in the last 3 monds? I mean, you stayed in New
today's
York,
a little bit hectic because, I've been in New York the whole time. So as Marlene mentioned, Monday was our first day where as residential and commercial real estate brokers that we've been permitted to actually do our job in person. So you can imagine I've had 3 months of backlog of sellers who want to get their apartments on the market, buyers who've been curious about what's going on. We're in a brand new experience in terms of how we may enter buildings and homes. We actually must submit liability and health waivers to indicate, in writing that the broker and that the buyer do not exhibit any symptoms and that they're in good health, and that the sellers require a liability, should anyone ever feel that a broker or buyer contracted an illness because of visiting in an apartment. It's surreal. It's absolutely, like you, I've been in this city the whole time. So I've experienced.
No, I actually haven't. I just got back.
Oh, I thought you've been here. Okay.
Yeah, no, I
have been here, and I feel very
so
blessed.
happy to be home. So happy.
Oh, yeah.
I've
been here.
I
and
know how I build culture claess in Connecticut. It's like, now I feel I'm like books.
You mentioned you were in Chelsea last night. I figured you've been here the whole time. I've been here, since March. I've only been away a few days. So
how have you been showing offerings? Because were people actually selling during this time?
We haven't been permitted to actually show apartments. So the work that we may have been doing, could have been staging, getting apartments ready. If buyers were in contract prior to the pandemic, there have been closings, but those deals were signed, most likely December, January, February. So there was that activity, but there was basically, the industry itself was really on hold for the past 3 months. So there was activity in terms of closing and preparing apartments for sale. Potentially, a lot of what we're doing now is creating more of a virtual world.
Ask about that.
Yeah. 3D, there's a brand called Matterport, and they have branded, I think, a very effective 3D tour of a home. So you really feel like it's self-guided. So you could actually walk yourself into closets, into
Matterport.
Matterport, yes. And if you, depending on how detailed you want to be, you're literally walking yourself around a room. You're looking into a pantry and a kitchen, and you're really getting a space, getting a sense of the space, short of the virtual glasses that we were potentially doing some years ago, you know, on a self-guided way. And they're fantastic. So I'm putting all of my listings on tour because we really, the theme that I love from Marlene, which I want to focus on, is health. You know, more than ever have we realized how valuable and precious our health is. And Marlene spoke about it with regard to, you know, some years ago it was LEED certified and wanting to make sure that we're being conscious of the environment, which is of course as important, if not more than ever. But it's so much also about, is it a healthy, healthful feeling building? Is the building enhancing our health in some way versus somehow detracting? So hence a Matterport tour where we are exposing ourselves to fewer people, and we're only going to see an apartment that really is inviting us after we've spent more time researching it online.
So now people are starting to go into physical spaces, right?
Just as of Monday. So we're in day 3 of it.
Required to, like, what's the process? So say, hey, Mike, I saw this listing, go show it to me.
No, it's complicated now. So we have to have 2 signed documents. Well, first of all, there are 2 things. One, fair housing laws have changed. So we are sending a fair housing disclaimer that represents, which is obviously so incredibly important, that we are, you know, have a very clear policy of equal opportunity home viewing and ownership, and that we're proponents of fair housing rules. And in the past, it was something that would have been hoped and implied, but now it's actually something that we very appropriately are making clear in writing in advance, that we forbid any type of discriminatory housing. But now we also have to have 2 documents signed that are related to COVID. So one is a release of liability, and the other is a declaration of health, of our health before we could enter a home. And of course we wear masks.
So how do you know that though? Like, you know, how can you be honest about that? Like, you don't
well,
know.
We hope that the person writing is they're signing that they do not have a fever, that they don't have any symptoms, that they are in good health, you know, and it is in fact a legal document they are signing. And certainly someone could be asymptomatic and not know, but it's being taken quite seriously in this industry. We are very careful to not expose doormen and people who work within buildings, as well as residents and others, you know, and homeowners who are very careful about their own health, want to be very sure that anyone coming into their home is healthy and well.
Are they wearing gloves? Are they wearing masks?
Well, we wear masks.
Okay.
We certainly, you know, sanitize when we leave. We're not allowing guests to use a restroom. We're not using bathrooms in people's homes. We're restricting as much tactile of the experience as possible, in terms of touching as little as possible. And, oh, can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
I'm sorry. And really limiting any type of exposure. So
yeah, I just wanted to show one thing that could be interesting. This is the new hot product. A bag you can.
Oh God.
So
I'll be buying.
You might want to have those when
would be
you're walking through the door.
A good pitch or closing gift.
There you go. Okay, now let's talk Exodus. Right? Are you, you know, are you seeing a lot more people who want to sell their place and or not be in New York anymore or in any other cities?
Well, you know, we know that news media, you know, everyone has to focus on a story, you know, so the story for a little while had been, and probably still is, everyone's leaving the city. You know, if you have a house in the Hamptons, you're moving to the Hamptons, you're moving to Greenwich and Westchester. And that is certainly true.
You just touched cash. Who uses cash anymore? Anyway.
You can't imagine what I'm doing. I just had windows cleaned and a new listing of mine. And I'm giving a tip to the wonderful gentleman, Alex, who does all my windows.
I love it. I love it. You in action.
So certainly there are people who are leaving the city. In my personal business, the people who are leaving the city now or have asked me to sell their home or discuss selling their home, we're always going to be leaving the city. And it was a matter of timing. So maybe they thought it was going to be when they had their 2nd or 3rd child, and the plan was already there. I don't know anyone who has said to me, I've been happy in the city. I never thought I would leave. And now I'm ready to leave. I don't want to be here anymore. I'm not comfortable, or I don't feel safe here anymore. I personally have not had anyone say that to me. The people that I'm working with who have chosen to move elsewhere had already been planning to do so, and it was about timing. Certainly we saw
I've heard.
Yeah, and certainly we saw Florida had attracted many people, you know, with regard to tax changes. And there's, and certainly people have decided to leave. What I think we're talking about in terms of an exodus is many people who, and certainly in New York, there's so many individuals who have second or third homes, and with school being on hold or camps, et cetera, they've chosen to spend more time. So from March possibly through the rest of the summer will be, Long Island, Hamptons, Westchester.
Right.
And I do believe it's very much school driven. If schools are again in person and classes resume in person in September, I believe these people will most likely be coming back. If it's
They're all
virtual, if
at
it's
the
online.
Hamptons, but all of us working people have to
Well,
say.
and that's the thing. And
There
if
was that
school is
article
online,
too in the Wall Street Journal or New York Times, I can't remember. Like where
if you have young kids and school is online, you most likely would be very happy to stay in your house, with your yard and not return to the city until school resumes. So every case is different. But
what about, I have a friend who owns a place and he has rented it. He's a condo, not a co-op. And for those of you who don't know the difference, a co-op, you have a board that has to approve. I'm in a co-op, whether you could have somebody rent your place or not. Condos, you could do whatever you want. He has a condo. He's been renting it. And he literally just got an email from the tenant saying, we don't want to be in New York anymore. We want to leave. So have you heard those examples, and what's the protocol?
well, the truth is there are those examples, certainly. But remember, this is not, and I was here during 9/11 and my son was about 3 months away from being born, and working in the city, and that was, and which we'll never recover from, but it was very much a New York experience, right? But what's so different about COVID is that this is a worldwide pandemic. It's an issue that the entire world is dealing with. So if one wants to leave New York, they could certainly decide to go to the West Coast or the Midwest or the Northeast. But as you highlighted earlier in the show, it's growing rapidly in certain areas and areas that we wouldn't necessarily think of. So we could leave, but then we're always where we end up, right? If we leave, there I am. So
Well,
it's not a New York situation.
I think more people, it might not be the safety thing. I think a lot of people are like, well, New York's not going to be New York anymore. You can't go to Broadway. And, Marlene, maybe you could chime in. You can't go to Broadway. All the stores are closing. Maybe they'll come back. It seems like you're both very optimistic, which you should be. There really isn't, you can't go to theaters. You don't want to ride the subway. So, New York isn't going to be New York. Do you think, what do you think about that? What do you think about New York? And right.
Look, things are changing. Obviously, New York has always been, I've also lived through the 70s. I've lived through the 80s. Many of us have seen New York go through different incarnations. And one of the positives that I see from the commercial standpoint, I love Marlene's take on it, is that I do feel that landlords had probably be in the past had probably been a little bit too inflexible in terms of rents that they were choosing. And I live on the Upper West Side. So half of Columbus Avenue prior to COVID was vacant because the smaller shops really couldn't afford to have to be in those locations. What I'm hoping is now we have such an interest and an appetite for retail, for cafes. I'm hoping that we're actually going to see a resurgence of new street activity because there is now such a hunger and a need for support of local businesses. In my own neighborhood, I'm seeing new places popping up where there had been empty storefronts. Yeah. I'm seeing it and I'm not going to pretend that things aren't changing, and of course they are, but they're changing all over the world. So it's going to take some time for this to recover. And we're looking at quite a long time, but I'm seeing a lot of wonderful positive change as well. So,
okay. It is a 3 minutes top the hour. There are some questions. I just want to respond and say one thing, and then I'll respond to Mike, and then I want to say one thing. One of the things that I am super hopeful for is one, maybe we'll become like Paris in New York, right? Where there are going to be
outdoor cafes,
yes.
Right?
And then secondly, because, real estate, or it might be cheaper to live here at some point, we might, all the, the artists were basically leaving the city because they couldn't afford it and they were going to other places like LA and now LA is expensive too, but some of the more emerging cities like Pittsburgh and Kansas City and Nashville. I'm hoping that like this becomes like the 70s and 80s, like you said, like where there's going to be artists who are living here and coming back and reconstituting the heartbeat of what made New York.
And also, I should add, and I'm someone who very, as are you, who appreciates the different cultural aspects of New York, whether it's Lincoln Center or Broadway or off Broadway. It is devastating to realize that we do not have at this time the ability to gather in person for any of these experiences. And I'm not sure what that different incarnation will be until these different venues are deemed safe again. I think we're going to see a lot more outside, and if there is an opportunity, which, as you mentioned, just with outdoor cafes, and if there's more of an opportunity for outdoor venues for entertainment. My son just graduated high school, and instead of a prom, there was actually a drive-in movie theater, and we certainly would love to see drive-ins return. We're looking
I
at
actually just read a
alternatives.
piece about driving concerts, right? Like,
Well,
where, maybe
out of need,
nobody wants to go
creativity
to
will.
sports anymore. Maybe we'll drive to a stadium now. Maybe that'll be interesting. We're going to go back to like prehistoric times.
We're going to have to get creative.
Right.
We
So
have to be
we
creative.
do have to wrap up for the hour, but are you both like on the go? If to answer questions, it's fine either way. If not, people could email me the questions and we could always, I could ask you guys to, answer them just by the phone for everybody.
Sure. I have a few minutes.
Okay. Before I go there, I just want to thank everybody again. This has been the summer semester, as I mentioned. Here's the Cindy Gallup. If you go to zeitguide.com/thank you, you could see all the videos we had, including last week's for the last 13. This was with Cindy Gallup, who was amazing in terms of helping us how to end racism in the corporate world. And we're taking a break next week because it's the July 4th holiday. So we have 6 more summer semester classes that are going to go all the way to August 12th. And, these are the people that we've had for the last 4 beginning summer semester culture classes. And then we are going to return to talk about publishing with the founders of Crown Magazine. And they are both Black. And I think I showed you the editorial that Lindsay actually wrote about, what she really feels, how, white people are responding to the racial injustice, the protests, and George Floyd's death. So I wanted to think about like all these publications as mid-tiers like Quartz and Refinery 29 and all these ones that emerged during the digital age are actually laying off a lot of people, where the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal have happened to actually rise in cultural cloud. They've survived mainly through events. And, so I feel like the great legacy ones are surviving and thriving. The mid-tier new ones are really strapped right now. We'll see what happens. And then there's these niche magazines or publications that I really feel excited about. So we're going to learn from Lindsay and Nkrumah. And then the week after, an amazing woman I just met, Roxana Mehran. She's a doctor, obviously, and she's a professor of medicine and the director of interventional cardiology, cardiovascular research and clinical trials. And that's another example of the intersection between COVID and the protests. Because as we know, many of the victims, a large majority of the victims are Black Americans because of a higher risk of heart disease, and in addition diabetes. And she's also going to tell us about what's been happening in the hospitals in terms of COVID and where we're going to go from there, and the future of heart health. We learned about the brain last week. We're going to go to the heart health. And so that's hopefully exciting. And then the rest after July 15th, I'll let you know who we're going to have. And of course, I like to highlight people from different industries. And so you can find out all about that, zeitguide.com/thank you. And so let's go through some questions. There was one that I was interested in. So what's going to happen to the people who are unemployed right now, especially in New York or everywhere in the world? You know, so they're losing their jobs. They don't have income to be able to afford New York City rent. Some who are closing their businesses. I know, Marlene, you just told me that like you can renegotiate, but if they're not in business, they have to close. And there are going to be a lot of bankruptcies, as the Wall Street Journal just reported a couple of days ago. Yeah. So, is there any wiggle room? What do we do? Do we have to leave? Do we have to break leases? Do we have to sell our places? Do we have to? So, you know, Marlene and Mike, you could both chime in on that.
I think there's definitely room for negotiation, but I was in touch with one of the major restaurateurs who are in the Hudson Yards. They own and operate lots of different restaurants, and they may have to close Hudson Yards because that's a fairly new restaurant that they opened, and they can't sustain it. So either the smaller business or the newer restaurants are going to either renegotiate their lease or really say to themselves, hey, I can't operate this. Let me just close up a couple of the newer restaurants or stores, and let me focus on the ones that are really successful and established.
Okay, and Mike.
Tune in.
Oh, sorry, Tony, Marlene. I just. What was the last thing you were going to say?
We have to hone in on what's working for us as a business owner in terms of operation.
Now, some of these businesses who've gotten these loans could actually pay, but it's going to run out. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, I guess if you're a landlord, you can't really penalize somebody if they go out of business, right? Or
Right.
can they?
No, they're not going to penalize it. They're going to do everything to keep the occupancy. They want their spaces occupied as much as you want to stay. So I think now is the time to really negotiate and communicate. I had mentioned and written to the guests there that it's important to negotiate, and communication is key. I think we have to come together. And I know landlords, some of them can be tough, but I think if we communicate properly and really justify, perhaps maybe you're going to pay some rent now or defer the rent for later. There are different ways to negotiate where the landlord doesn't feel like they're losing completely and that they're gaining as well. It has to be win-win on both sides.
Okay. And Mike, what about, I mean, I think there are leniencies for mortgages, but if you're renting, I mean, you know, it's a gamble, because if I were a landlord, right, I would want to keep the tenant, but I would also want to make the money. So if they're not paying me the money, they'll say, you know, you got to leave. But on the flip side, it might be hard to get somebody else, right?
It's very much a case-by-case situation. If you're renting from one of the large managing agents, you know, the Glenwoods and the Relateds, and that's a different story. You know, many people do rent homes in, you know, it could be a 6-story townhouse. You know, it could be a family who might own 10 buildings in Brooklyn and may have tenants. You know, and I do imagine that those landlords are going to be probably more sympathetic to someone who's either lost their job or who has had an income reduction. And as Marlene said, no one wants to have to, I shouldn't say no one wants, but, you know, owners are not so eager to go and have to try to find new tenants who are going to pay on time. And if you've been a good client, if you've been a good tenant, I'm pretty sure they're going to want to work with you and hopefully make some concessions to keep you there. So it's, we're all kind of playing this out as we go along.
Okay. I want to ask you one other thing. You know, Mike, knowing you and seeing your website, you really have been good at, I'm just shifting to this, I just want to show, and Marlene, you could chime in on this too. Mike Lubin, look at that.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
I can't.
No, it's great. It's great. Oh, now you're hanging out in the snow, so maybe we'll have outdoor. You know what I said last week? A great opportunity is to get into the outdoor heater business, right? But you know, you have an interesting brand, right? I mean, both of you. There's so many real estate agents in New York, everywhere in the world. How do you stand out?
So
well, you know what? We're
it was so.
Marlene, why don't you go first?
Yeah, there are 83,000 supposedly, approximately, brokers out there. Now they're saying because of the COVID, there's going to be probably about now 63,000. And what you need to do is to stand out, is stay in constant contact. With the owners, you have to just work a little bit harder and reach out and have that cutting edge, where you have your relationship with your owners, where you have relationship with your buyers. For me, it's getting them the best deal and really focusing on what the needs are right now.
And how do you maintain your reputation? Do you get press? I mean, like, and
A lot of it is word of mouth. I do get press. It's finding off market deals where I can actually, I was told I make my sellers millions of dollars because I'm able to find that either key buyer to 1031 exchange or the right timing, or I'm able to get, a great deal because of my relationship. Let's say on a multifamily property in Brooklyn, because they're selling a portfolio and I'm able to get them a better deal because, again, of timing, of communication, and key is negotiation as well, and making sure that the buyer is in the right light for the seller. The seller always wants to make sure that their buyer is the right buyer for them. And communication.
So
And
it's more about word of mouth, trust. Mike, I know that, I trusted you, but you created, a brand for yourself through media. Look, you have a TV show, but how important is that? Like, what would you say is your shtick, and how did you create that?
I think for me at least, the only thing that works is being true to who you are. And when in any professional situation, I think if we're trying to emulate a character or a competitor that we're seeing, and if it's not authentic to who we are, it's pretty apparent. So I just try to be myself. I'm interested in learning a lot about a lot of different things in terms of reading and culture and spirituality and the outdoors. And so I'm always meeting new people. I'm always trying to become a better version of myself. I'm bringing that into my client interactions, in my marketing. My newsletter reflects sort of things that I'm going through in a real time way. It's my newsletter for the next period, which will be next week, kind of discussing the market we're in, is also going to be very much about the outdoors and how we find, serenity outside and in nature, because I think so many of us are craving.
So you said culture, which obviously is my thing. By the way, before I forget, why don't you both put your contact information in the chat for people, and maybe
Sure.
they could even subscribe to you or whatever, or social media. Yeah, it's interesting to me because, Mike, you just said culture, and you're talking about the environment around you, not just about the home you're selling, right? So like, you can't just know about the niceties or the aspects of the home, right? You also, like, there's a great, like Chelsea, there's these, like, about Marlene, you say, like, maybe this is a way you could collaborate. Like, tell them about my ZZ Cafe that I just opened, and Mike could be like, oh, down the street is, so, but like you said spirituality and culture. So like, it really depends on your personal brand, because people have to like you. I mean, real estate agents never.
And for some people, their brand may be that they're a ruthless negotiator. Everyone has, their brand can be that they are working 24 hours a day. So and their brand could also just be that I'm hardworking and I'm going to show up and be courteous and professional. So it doesn't mean that you have to have such a distinctive identity per se, but I do think that we have to be true to who we are, and if we love travel, if we love cooking, bring that into our work. That makes us more interesting to our clients. It draws people to us because we are multidimensional and not just a broker. No one's just a doctor or a lawyer. We are, we're complex. And when you hire a real estate broker, residential or commercial, you're hiring a life expert. It's an expert on that particular city. And that covers a lot of different ground.
So yeah, you need to know that in addition to everything else.
Sure.
Hey, any other last thing I'll ask, and then we could close it. Any other observations you've both been seeing about? I mean, I know you're mainly New York based, and I know you have some properties in Jersey, Marlene. So, do you see any other opportunities or interesting developments in other cities in the country, like people knowing that they have to work from home, they could work from anywhere? Do you see, like we talked about the exodus, but not so much New York exodus? Like, are you hearing about other places of opportunity? Uh, Curious.
I think it's going to be about nature. It's going to be about the outdoors. So if someone can't afford a home outside of where they're living, then they may rent one, or they'll go camping. It's we are safest, of course, although we see these pictures of people in beaches, cheek by jowl, so to speak, in Miami. But if we're in nature, if we're at a beach, if we're on a mountain, if we're rock climbing, we're safe and we're healthy. So I think more than ever, there will be an appreciation for being healthy in nature, and feeling the gratitude for that, which I hope also leads to more appreciation, awareness of the ecosystem and ecology and land conservation. So that's kind of where I see a trend, hopefully, and hopefully it's not just a trend; it's a lifelong new chapter. Being more aware and grateful for resources and being in nature.
Okay. Well, so how do you do that in a city? You just find a city that's close to nature that you could.
Or I'm in Central Park every day. I bought a bike a few months ago. You could bike up the Hudson within an hour of New York. As you know, you could be hiking, you could be fishing, you feel like you're in another planet. New York is one of the most blessed states in terms of close access to the cities for beautiful, unspoiled nature. So it's readily available for people who are
And we
interested.
will get through this. We will get through this. And we have to just nurture ourselves while we're going through the slow process of healing and moving forward.
Talk about
Absolutely.
spirituality. Maybe I should fire my shrink and just talk to you every day. Anyway, I'd fire my shrink. I'm just kidding. Anyway, thank you both for coming.
Thank you so much for having us.
I love Culture Class. I love hearing from such interesting, intelligent leaders like both of you, Marlene and Mike.
Thank you.
I wish you both the best of luck. Like you said, we've been through this in terms of 9/11 and then the Great Recession. This is a little bit more complicated, I think. And the other thing is that I hope we all think about is, like, obviously we want to change the racial and financial inequality in the world. And, one of the other things that I'm really hoping about this is not only will we bring in more artists, but, we will think about how neighborhoods and housing and zoning is really creating, racial tension and injustice and impacting poor education in poorer neighborhoods. So, I'm hoping that everybody in your business thinks about that too moving forward. So I wish.
That's in our business. And I'm sure Mike can agree that that's all racial equality and getting together and as one. That's extremely important. And I think the real estate world really focuses on that. And absolutely, that's important. But
Okay.
we all need to be safe, I have to say, just right this moment. Just really feel safe and heal.
Yes.
Safe and healthy. That's the new trend. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody, for coming. Again, next week, we're skipping the week after, July 8th, that Wednesday, 2 p.m. East Coast time, 11 a.m. Pacific Coast time, 6 p.m. GMT, 7 p.m. UK, 8 p.m. Europe. I think everybody in Asia will be sleeping, but they could see the recording. And thank you all who contributed. I love doing this and hope we could keep doing it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.